Hey everybody, this is Mickey. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to discuss villains and how we should integrate them and how we should look at them as a whole. In particular, I'm going to be discussing sympathetic villains, villains that have tragic backstories. Now, this does not mean I'm advocating terrible people in real life who claim to have cause for their actions. And I'm going to get to that in just the first point. Point number one, it is their decision to be evil. Yes, there are sadists out there who just want to be evil and watch the world burn because shut up. But there are people out there, I believe most of them, do terrible things because that's the way they perceive the world. They've been through something has happened to them, they've been influenced by a catalyst, a person, an event, something that is causing a few screws to go loose, and made them go on a wild rampage and do whatever the hell they want, no matter what gets in their way or who is going to get hurt. The fact that it's their decision, I think, is a very, very important thing to understand. Even if someone's being influenced, they are the ones that say, okay, I'm gonna do this, because it's me. They've made that choice unto themselves, and that's what's going to happen. No one's going to tell them otherwise. That's why I think that when we are looking at villains in real life, they do not get a justification for the things they've done. At all times, we as humans always feel we want to do something terrible to that person who made fun of us, or hurt someone in our family, or our friends, or broke into our house, or killed one of our family members. I'm going to the extreme here. Most likely are not going to act on those actions. But does that make us evil people? No, we haven't done anything. We are allowed to think that terrible things and feel terrible things, but until we act on them, we're still innocent. There's an amazing anime called Psycho-Pass, which actually discusses this a lot. In this anime, they have guns that when you aim at them at a person, they can detect if the person has evil intent or not, and if they're evil, then you can kill them. But the person hasn't actually done anything yet, so they're not actually a bad person, or I guess you could say a criminal or a villain until they've actually done something. People have evil thoughts all the time. If you really feel you have to do something about that, you can always talk with a friend, get a psychologist, your family member, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about what really makes a villain, and it really comes down to your decision to be evil, whatever that is. For your villain, it means digging down deep into their backstory, into their personality, what happened, what caused them to just go crazy. There must be some reason. Because, unlike in real life, we actually do want to sympathize with the villain, or at least understand them. It'll be much easier to get behind them, and it will increase the tension, and it will make us get that urge of excitement whenever things go wrong for the villain. The more the villain is going to be unhinged, the harder they're going to work to undermine the hero, and it's going to make things harder for the hero. So that's why it's very important for us to understand our antagonist, our villain, and see what their motives are and why they are that way. This doesn't have to be revealed at first. You obviously should take your time and don't force feed your reader things all at once. You can give hints and little by little explain it. One of my favorite examples actually for this is in Mistborn, and please turn this video off right now if you have not read the books. In Mistborn, we are introduced to the villain, the Lord Ruler, who is just evil because shut up. We're not given any reason. But we understand his motives 2 books later after he's actually killed off. He was influenced, unfortunately, by the god Ruin and did his best to keep his sanity and try to protect the world, but it made him go crazy. And if we get to understand him a lot better, even after he's dead, and he's even given a character, even after he's not even featured in the books anymore. He's still a villain in the first book, but he's still very, very important, and it makes us understand him a lot better. I guess many times characters claim we're doing things for the greater good. In real life, we also claim to give tough love or do things that are questionable for the greater good. That's going to lead us to our next point, which is, what about originality? Every idea has been done already. Every idea has been done already. There's nothing new that really can be added. But if you want to create something new, you want to write a book, you want to make a villain, if you want your villain to be believable, you have to at least make him believable. If he's a narcissist, have him think he's perfect and blame all of his issues on the main protagonist. If he's psychotic, make him do things that contradict one another so we can get an idea into his psyche. Again, don't force feed it to your reader. Explain it little by little. Sprinkle hints, pepper hints all over the place. That is the way you can make their personality. That's the way you can give them a little bit of nuance. Don't worry about originality. Don't. Worry about their character, who they are, their motives, their decisions, and how they're going to affect the protagonist. We'll talk about that later, so hang on. Alright, my next point is going back to what I said before, understanding and sympathizing with the antagonist. Usually when we hear about some terrible thing that happened in the news, there was a bombing, there was a stabbing, there was a shooting, there was a rape, or a child was molested, terrible things, one of the things that we'll say is, how could they do such a thing? As normal, good people, that is something that we contemplate all the time, and it's the immediate response in our brains when we see something like that. This is why it's very, very important to have your audience and readers understand why the villain is doing such things, what motivates them to make these horrible decisions. By getting your reader to sympathize with the villain, then it doesn't just become a fight against good and evil, it's a fight against these two conflicting ideologies of the hero or the villain, or they could be the same ideologies with maybe a little bit of nuance and difference in them. And this will make it easier for them to actually read your book, and they'll actually get a lot more tense every single time that they see the villain, every single time they breathe, every single time they walk on the scene. Your villain shouldn't have the most page time, but the scene should be made better and be made a magnet every single time they are present, because you know something is going to happen, something terrible is going to happen, and your villain shouldn't be shown just for fan service. They should be shown in order to expedite the plot, in order to move things along. Now that brings me to my next point, which is how they actually affect the story. Villains like the Joker are able to prove to us how much of an influence he can have, even when he's not actually present on the scene. And I actually think that makes him a lot more scary than he is. The moment someone becomes ominous and omnipotent in your mind, they become a lot more scary, because they don't even need to be there to actually have an impact on you. Think about bullies, for example. A bully can tell you terrible things, and you can always be afraid of bumping into them, and that will make you scared even when they're not around. And when they do come, it's gonna make you go crazy. Your skin's gonna crawl, your hands are gonna sweat, you'll feel like you want to die. Those villains who can make an influence on the story and the hero and not actually be present are actually the most interesting villains, in my opinion. Seeing their influence on the world and the plot and having them not actually be there in the moment is significant. It shows how much importance they have to the story, how much they mean, and how much of a threat they really are. If the only problems the villain's going to make is knocking on the protagonist's door and killing his parents and then going, but not doing anything else unless we see him, then that isn't going to be a very, very scary person. Yeah, in real life he would be, but in fiction, not really, because if he's not doing anything in between, then he's not really scary. But if we do frame it differently, if the hero just saw his parents die by the hands of the villain and he's constantly thinking about the villain, then the villain has achieved that omnipotence and ominousness. That is up to you to get to integrate with your hero. This is going to segue into my next point about how the villain should affect the hero. The hero and the villain are foils. You don't necessarily have to write them that way, but that's the way that I view it, because one of them really does affect the other. It's usually the villain that affects the protagonist, so the one that gets them swept into the story. You could also change this around, but this is how it's traditionally done, so you could look at that as a sort of structure, how to get your story moving. Usually the villain should have something to do with the inciting incident, which would make it a lot more sense for your protagonist when they finally discover them and say, "Oh, you're the one that did that. You're evil. I gotta stop you. I gotta do something about you, man." The connection that the villain has to the hero shouldn't be forced. It has to be organic and it has to make sense. One of the examples I actually like the most for this is Harry Potter. A lot of people say that, oh no, Voldemort just went to Harry because shut up. No, he didn't. First of all, he could have gone to Neville instead. Number two, he actually decided to make Harry his enemy. He was so paranoid that someone's gonna destroy him, and that when the prophecy came, and he almost himself kind of made the prophecy that Harry would be a child that would arise to kill him. His own paranoia kind of destroyed him. That's very interesting to think about, to be honest. It doesn't actually feel forced. He brought it upon himself. He didn't just randomly single out Harry and say, "I'm gonna kill you, better watch out." Not at all. It actually is organic and it makes perfect sense. In real life, villains, people that have an actual effect on your life consistently, usually have a personal background with you. If there's someone on the street that comes and stabs me, he may be against my race, he may be against my opinions, who knows what. But usually it's not going to be someone that actually has a long rift with me. I'm talking, again, like I was saying with the Joker, more ominousness and omnipotence, less being on the scene, and actually having a psychological effect on you. those psychological effects happen because of what's happened between you in the past, between this particular villain. You have to think, why would your villain want to go after the hero in the first place? Do you think the hero has possible chances of taking them down? Do the hero have something that they want? Are him and the hero after the exact same thing? Has the hero done something bad to him in the past, or someone who has a connection with the hero, have they harmed the villain in the past? You have to think these things through, and you have to make sure they're consistent. For villains, you do want them to have moments of vulnerability. You can't make them all powerful. They are humans, and just because you have decided to become evil, which means it's going to be harder to stop you because that's just the way the world works, it doesn't make you all powerful. You still are going to mess up, you still are going to make questionable decisions, and you're going to make mistakes. That's just the way the world works, but that doesn't mean we need to see the mistakes. But they should definitely be present. If you're writing for the point of view of your villain, be very, very careful about it and not have them all the time, mind you. Because seeing the villain is kind of a treat for the reader. So you shouldn't have it way too often, but when you do, I would take extra care in those chapters to write them in a way that's appropriate and fulfilling for them. Not just an easy way to get the reader invested. No, you're giving them rare insight into the villain's head, so make that rare insight continue to be rare and not have it show the entire time. Otherwise, it's just not interesting. Unless the story is completely about the villain or the anti-hero like Dexter or Breaking Bad, or Death Note or Code Geass, then that's fine when they're the main character. But when they're the villain, they're not the main character, and you gotta pay attention to that. And the last thing I'm going to discuss is, in my opinion, the most important point about villains and villainy, and that is justice. In real life, evil people will get away with everything. Why? Because the way the law is constructed, a lot of bureaucracy has to happen until you can actually catch them. You have to take so many ridiculous steps to actually stop them and make sure you don't turn into a bad person yourself, or don't get involved with the law in order to actually bring this person to justice. Justice system is in favor of villains in real life, and that has to happen in your story too. That's why Game of Thrones is so popular, because the world is just against all of our heroes. Everything. The villains are just handed everything they need. Everything just happens to work out for them. Yeah, some of them die here and there, but mostly the game is in their favor. They hold all the cards, and they should. That's because that's the way things are in real life. Whether you're writing fiction, science fiction, fantasy, contemporary, whatever, your villain should be in control. They should be the most powerful, they should be a force to be reckoned with, and it should be very difficult to stop them. People shouldn't jump at the opportunity to help the hero stop the villain. Why? Because in real life, people won't. People will be scared. They would need a very good justification, a very good reason or influence to actually step out of their comfort zone and do something that is uncomfortable. So it is very important to actually have that injustice. Make things super difficult for your hero, particularly when they're dealing with the antagonist. This will make things a lot much better for them when they've actually succeeded in defeating the antagonist. I think that you should end your story with the antagonist winning? That is entirely up to you. So let's go over the points, shall we? The first point is, it is the villain's decision. They are not evil for no reason whatsoever. You have to define at some point in the story, what is it that made them evil? Point number 2, feel your villain isn't original enough? Well, give them nuance and make that nuance make sense. If they're crazy, give a reason for it. Show little examples here and there that will justify that craziness. Number 3, making your villain sympathetic and understandable. This will make it easier for us to actually root for them and will make them much more interesting characters when they're on page, and they should be a magnet on every single time that they're on page. Number 4, how they affect the story and their relationship with the protagonist. It should be relevant, not forced. It should make sense and be able to affect the story and the protagonist in a particular way. And the last point, number 5, is have everything in the villain's favor. You can make things difficult for them, but make sure that they hold most of the cards, which will force your hero to work harder. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave me comments below what you think the ideal villain is, or how you've written your villain in particular, and I will see you in another video. Bye.